Welcome to the Trad Dads podcast, where we examine cultural and political issues through the lens of traditional thought. All right, thanks for joining us. Today I have Levi B with me, and of course my name is Levi R. Today we're going to be talking about social media and kind of how innovation has gone in social media, how the big social media companies are working these days, and maybe if what we could benefit from using some of these other types of social media platforms and sort of how some of those work. And since Levi B is a very tech savvy type of individual, I thought he would be a great person to talk to on this. And I know he uses some of these, I guess you call them alternative social media sites. So for me, I've used Facebook since it came out. I was a freshman in college, I think, when it came out. So, I mean, I was kind of right around that beginning point when Facebook kind of became a thing. And you had to have a .edu email to be able to get access to it and all that. I didn't get on Twitter until I think 2015. But those are really the only social media platforms I've used that I would call, traditional social networks anyway. I mean, YouTube, sure. But so Levi, what do you think? Because my thing is like we all, a lot of us in our sort of, political circle, we complain about big social media companies and the sort of censorship that they can do and all of that sort of thing. But, I guess some of the arguments to the contrary would be like, well, just build your own, social media platform. And the economist in me says like, well, okay, but that's not easy because you have bandwagon effect issues. Like everybody's on Twitter. And so nobody has an incentive to get off of Twitter. So can we start talking about that? And maybe you can tell us about some of these alternative platforms and if they have like what they've done to try to attract people and how successful they've been.
Yeah, the whole bandwagon thing is a good point to start things off with, because like the reason why people are on Facebook is because their friends are on Facebook. You didn't like other than those of us who kind of signed up in the early days, you joined Facebook, you joined Instagram because your friends were sharing stuff and you wanted to join in that fun, if you could call it fun. So it is a bit of an issue. Like if I were to say, well, I'm going to just build my own thing, how do I get my friends and family and the people that I want to see posting there to do it? So yeah, the early adopter has a struggle. And I remember when Twitter was kind of the new thing, I didn't know anybody on Twitter. I was, following personalities and whatnot just because those are the people. And there's still very few people that I know in the real world that are also on Twitter. Like everyone's on Facebook and everyone's on Instagram, but Twitter still has a bit of that that bandwagon to fight with. But yeah, so
it's used to have a smaller user base, and they all kind of seem to. I heard one time it was like 25% of the content on Twitter, like the posts, are generated by people who call themselves journalists.
Yeah, Twitter definitely has a bit of the fact that a lot of people are using it to consume and not to create. And Facebook is becoming more of that too. Like you're going to Facebook and you're scrolling and you're not posting as much, but you're consuming more. And that, that eventually makes the content not as good and less people controlling more of the content just because that's what's being consumed.
And it seems like it becomes more and more about the advertising. It becomes more and more in your face because there's not something else to dilute it with.
Yeah, Instagram's a good example of that, where when I signed up for Instagram less than a year after they launched, it was just people posting. And I got a couple friends in my social circles to sign up and do the same thing. And it was good back then. But now you go to Instagram and every fourth post in the newsfeed is an advertisement, and the ads are very low quality most of the time. And it doesn't feel as personal anymore because there's so much commercial content being posted that we're seeing like this high, like Instagram started out being you sharing lousy photos with filters to make them look kind of cool. But now it's like any people that are posting like that are getting diluted by commercial posts that are high quality, and it really makes it like you get so much less out of it for the amount of time you're putting into consuming the content.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the main point of all these big social media platforms, because their monetization has always been, you the user are not actually the customer. You are the
Yes.
product. Like your clicks and your views, that is what they sell to the advertisers. And so
Yeah.
I think that at least if someone else is going to compete with these big platforms, it's going to be tough, because if they're going to use that same monetization strategy, I mean, good luck.
Yeah. For Twitter's an interesting one in that, because for the longest time it was a common thing that was said was that Twitter is such a big company, but they still haven't broken even. And I don't know if that's still the case, but it used to be said a lot more. And it was interesting thinking like, okay, I'm using this product that's not making money, like it's spending investors' money and that's it. And it used to be better back then. It used to have a lot less ads and a lot less commercial interest. And now they don't say that. Like, I'm not sure if it's broken even or not, but now they've made changes, especially recently. They've made changes that are obviously done to make sure that you see the ads and spend the advertisers' dollars properly.
So then if the constant refrain from people like Ben Shapiro or whatever is, okay, well, at the end of the day, if you don't like the way these social media companies work, then just go build your own. But I mean, so we have this bandwagon effect in place, but I mean, I kind of see the point. If it's that bad, I mean, why shouldn't we be able to just build an alternative? And are there alternatives?
Yeah, the build your own question is like, well, that's a lot of work. And I've had, projects in the past, especially in school, when, you could make up imaginary clients, where you'd be like, yeah, let's try building a social network. And it's a lot of work. There's an interesting player in that game, if you could put it that way, that it's a piece of software called Mastodon. And it's interesting because instead of it being like, okay, let's call it a social network in itself. Instead of it being a social network that is run by one company and it's just that company's presence online and you go to their system and sign up. Rather, it's a piece of software that's published and anyone can take that software and install it themselves and have their own social network. So in that way, you're not having to do the whole building process. You're taking this social network out of the box and setting it up on a server that you have full control over. So the barrier to entry is a lot less than saying, let's just build our own. Like if you have, a circle of friends that are maybe into horse training or something, and rather than saying, oh, let's build our own social network, it's let's get a server set up and install this software, and then we've got our own social network out of the box without having any work to do other than the installing process. So
I think to non-tech people like me, a server sounds kind of intimidating, but all that really means is just like a dedicated computer that just operates and has memory and stuff like that. That's really all that means.
It does still need, you need a nerdy guy to set it up, but it's a lot less of an overhead. It's a lot easier for a small group of people to say, let's set up our own social network, rather than saying like, let's get 5 people to put in countless hours of work and build something from scratch. It's like we're taking something that's already been built. And
so this is kind of a platform that sort of allows you to build your own little segment of the platform.
Yeah, the thing that Mastodon and there's some related products as well out there, but the thing that Mastodon has that makes it interesting is this concept of the Fediverse, which is a great buzzword. And it's a portmanteau of federated universe. So what the idea is that my Mastodon instance can talk to other Mastodon instances out there. If you think of it like the way email works, like there's Gmail and there's Hotmail and there's Levi's little email server that he runs himself. They can all talk to each other because they all use the same standards of communication. So Mastodon and the Fediverse is kind of like that. If I set up a Mastodon server, I can talk to people on other Mastodon servers using the same technology. So the way Mastodon appears when you're using it is it's very similar to Twitter, same kind of idea. You've got a news feed and you can follow people and they can follow you and you post and whatnot. So it's kind of like a ripoff of Twitter, if you want to put it that way. But instead of it just being like this closed silo of only people can talk to each other, you end up with, because of the Fediverse, you end up with, I can follow someone from my instance of Mastodon, my little silo, but I can also go and I can follow someone else on a different system. So that way I kind of have my own personal space on the server that I'm running, and I have full control over that. But I'm also able to go and follow someone else on a different server. So it helps prevent a bit of the like, oh, I'm not going to sign up for that social network because no one else I know is on it. It's more of, I can sign up on the one that I like best, that fits my thoughts and my beliefs and how I believe things should be run best. But I can still go and follow the celebrities that are on this other one, and I can go follow this personality on a different system.
So then if that's the case, like if we have this Fediverse thing, this federated universe of all of these different kind of social media platforms, maybe with different rules. And so, I guess the idea would be that, well, if you build your little server and you can decide who that server can talk to. And so it allows you, I guess it seems to allow you some freedom to kind of censor on your own. Like you can hear who you want to hear and who you don't want to hear. But I guess, so to me, it just seems like the next step is, well, all they have to do is just convince people that it's better and try to get them all to move in kind of big chunks. Like, obviously, if enough of my friends, I don't know, I have like 300 people on my Facebook and I think I follow like 700 accounts on Twitter. I mean, if I could just get a chunk of those people to move to, maybe my own server or whatever, then or get them to move to their own servers and then we could talk to each other. I feel like that would be enough to make it work in terms of being a rival to Twitter and Facebook. But so are there other types of features in some of these platforms that are actually better in terms of like usage? Because I know I had a Gab account for a while, just because it was new and I wanted to check it out. It was one of the first, I guess, alternative social media sites that I ever heard of. And it was really interesting because I think they had this whole idea where you could censor certain words from your timeline. And then I feel like maybe a few months later, then Twitter all of a sudden picked up that same functionality. Like they copied it from Gab. And Gab, they have longer posts and you can edit them. And that's something people constantly complain about on Twitter is the length of the post and whether or not you can edit. And so Gab is almost like a combination of Reddit and Twitter to an extent. But it does have those interesting kind of filtering mechanisms and stuff like that. Do you see, some of these different kinds of features and some of these other platforms that you've used?
Yeah. The thing with Mastodon is, it's out of the box. It can do a lot. It has longer posts than Twitter for one. I think it's 500 characters in length or something like that. It doesn't have the ability to edit posts, but it has a nice little way to delete and repost the same thing with edits. So kind of the same as editing, but a little bit different. But the thing about systems built to work with the Fediverse is if you really wanted to and you had the expertise, you could build your own client, so to speak, that connects to the Fediverse. So what Gab actually did recently, about a month ago, I think, or two, they relaunched their whole system so that it's connected to the Fediverse. So now I can log in to my account on the Mastodon server that I use, and I can go and follow people who are posting on Gab, and they can follow me. So now Gab has become part of this interconnected network of social networks.
But they haven't lost any of their control over their own stuff. Like they haven't
Right.
lost any control over how the Gab policies or anything like that work.
Yeah. So they've basically just said that other systems on the Fediverse can now access the content that's posted on their thing. And so in the whole censorship thing, this means that there's a lot of I guess you could say left-leaning servers, Mastodon servers out there that have said, let's block everything posted from Gab because they disagree with it.
But so that, I mean, all that does is just make it so that I mean, it's just sort of like, who cares? Like,
yeah, that's
the
the thing about it is, I could start up an instance, and I could say this is only for people who identify with like a very specific mindset, and then I could decide to block instances that I know disagree with that, and they could block me back. But it's not affecting the experience for other people.
Yeah, it's not like Jack Dorsey of Twitter just deciding that you're a bad person and no one.
Yeah, like on Twitter, they could say, we no longer allow posts from, let's come up with a demographic. We no longer allow posts from white males, and then boom, everyone's affected by that. Whereas on the Fediverse, one instance could say we no longer allow posts from white males, and all the other instances that don't care about that particular one aren't affected. There's no being forced to follow a specific set of beliefs or opinions or anything like that.
Okay. Well, so I think all that's interesting, and I think it's especially interesting to see that the innovation is really actually happening with these smaller platforms. Like I know Minds, MINDS, is really interesting because it's a bunch of seemingly sort of left-wing guys from California that basically have built a free speech platform, and it's sort of like Gab in the sense that they have their own like Bitcoin kind of thing.
Yeah.
They seem to be very full service. Like they sort of have like group functions, kind of like Facebook, but definitely the main feed is more like Twitter or something. And then they also have a video platform. I mean, they're kind of, it seems like they're trying to kind of be the sort of a one-stop shop. And of course, I mean, they're probably having trouble getting to the scale that these other platforms. I mean, that's just going to be the way it is. But it's really interesting to me how much innovation there is. And from an economic standpoint, I mean, a lot of times when you have an industry that has a handful of really big firms and then a bunch of smaller firms, you tend to see innovation from these startup-y kind of things because people are trying to get bought out. But in this case, it's really not that. I mean, it's not. These startups have nothing but contempt for the big companies. They would, the Minds guys, I feel like they wouldn't sell out to Twitter for, all of King Midas's gold. It's like,
yeah,
it's a really interesting dynamic from an economic standpoint. But I think it's good to see that. But I think one of the big objections you would get from, again, people kind of on our side is that, this is just sort of a fool's errand. Like, maybe it's fun for the innovation aspect of it or whatever, but you're never going to, you're never really going to compete with Facebook and Twitter until they just happen to fall apart. And so maybe, it's good to be building these alternatives in concert with, policy action directed at, ensuring fairness or whatever. But they're not alternatives. Like we still have to fight the battle against Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that from the censorship perspective. What do you think about that?
I think to say that it's not, like a viable contender is, especially with the idea of the distributed social networks using the Fediverse, is it's almost not giving them enough credit. Like, yeah, one instance of Mastodon with 100 people on it is not going to compete with Facebook, but the whole of the Fediverse and all the different accounts using it and the different uses that it's being developed to use, that's it's kind of a different ball game. It's not one group of people competing with one social network, which is Twitter or Facebook or whatever you want to compete with. It's more of like a different mindset to how social media should be done, that it makes things more, it's more open, that you could say, well, I'm going to sign up for this and not be part of what is Facebook, because Facebook is such a waste of time. And you get such a different experience that I think more and more people are wanting to get away from kind of the distraction of the endless newsfeed that is Facebook and Instagram. And also just having the smaller communities is a way to, like, you feel a lot more connected when you're on a server that has 162 people, for example, than, just shouting into the void on Twitter and hoping that the right people see what you have to say.
So that seems like an interesting way to talk about it, because it seems like that is kind of like it's almost like a return to the original idea of these types of things, where, like Facebook, I mean, it kind of reminds me that, the main restriction was you had to have a .edu email.
Oh yeah.
Only for college students, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's still a very large group of people, but if these things are supposed to be, communities, and I know, like for instance, on Facebook, there's, there's groups for everything, these and pages and stuff like that. They're mostly groups, I think, because you force people to answer a few questions before you let them in and stuff, and you have moderators, and and I found one for, I just bought an old truck, and I'm trying to kind of restore it while I drive it, but there's a whole community of like thousands of guys who are into these same trucks, and so it's just so much fun to to have these people to talk to and get advice from, and but it seems like that was the original meaning, and now that there's just this veneer of the political crap just gets in the way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been my experience with groups on Facebook. What do you have? Do you think that that's an effective way to kind of get out of the whole censorship issue?
Yeah, the groups on Facebook, I think, that's where kind of, I don't want to make a huge prediction, but I feel like that's where the future is more of smaller niches. It's not shouting to the void, and it's kind of the same as on Reddit. Like you're participating in a group for a specific purpose. With the Fediverse, it's kind of the same. Like I could sign up for a Mastodon instance that's specifically for a certain type of people, like, for example, one that's made for Catholics. And along with my feed of the people that I follow, I can also click on what's called the local feed. And that's everyone in that instance of Mastodon. So kind of like looking at all the posts in a Facebook group. And I think that's something that's really interesting to look at for the future, is we're not just looking at the people that we follow, and we're not just talking to the people we follow. We're also talking to a local group that's related in some way or another. Like the one instance of Mastodon that I'm on is all people connected to a specific podcast, and there's 4,000 people there, but everyone has a bit of the same mentality in what they talk about and the way they talk about it. So I can go and I can look at the local feed, and I'm seeing related posts from people I have never met, but I know that there's a level of familiarity with them. If I respond to them, they're seeing that, it's another fan of this particular podcast that is responding to them and has somewhat of a same mindset when it comes to the topics we're discussing.
So I think, that's something that people go to for this kind of thing. And so the last thing I think to kind of wrap up on this is, when people talk about, building the alternative and stuff like that, I think they assume that, these companies are sort of just like your standard, normal economic profit maximizers. And the problem is, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while, is that, the reality is that they're not profit maximizers, and most companies aren't. I mean, there was a recent study that came out saying that, a lot of these big companies that, span the entire US, they keep their prices consistent all over the country just for the PR effect of it. Like you wouldn't want to have, lower prices in Mississippi and higher prices in San Francisco for, Walmart or whatever. And so, obviously they're missing out on profit there because they could use price discrimination, and make more money. So they're obviously not like literally profit maximizing to completely the nth degree like they could be.
Right.
And so what's interesting, I think, is that, these platforms, especially like YouTube and Twitter and stuff like that, they can censor political content with impunity because most of their revenue, and it's especially on Twitter, it's like most of their revenue comes from, Minecraft videos and, kid toy unboxing videos and stuff like that. Their revenue comes from that stuff. It does not come from, some, YouTuber in the middle of nowhere. And then if 15 people on Twitter shriek that they're racists or whatever, then they just, it's like, well, this is just annoying. I'm just going to shut the channels off.
Yeah. If YouTube knows that like the bulk of their advertisers don't want to be seen on videos about specific topics. So rather than allow those videos to run ads and make the advertisers mad, they just say you can't monetize that video, and it's you're beholden to the advertisers' desires and not your content creators' desires.
Yeah, and it seems like these other alternatives, if we can get the Gen X to understand how a server might work, then maybe we could get them to swap over. So do you have any final thoughts on any of this social media stuff? Like what do you think, we should do with social media? What's the best way for like your normal non-techie kind of person to try to push back on this stuff and help the creation of these alternatives?
Yeah, for the normal non-techie person, I would say find a Mastodon instance that fits with the way you think and what you like. And I will provide you with a link you could put in the description of a good place to go to find one.
Great. Yeah, I'll do that.
But that's the kind of thing, like the thing with Mastodon is there's already a lot of instances out there. And so the barrier to entry for an average Joe who doesn't know someone who can set up a server, the barrier to entry is already very low.
Right. We don't have to set up a new server now. We can just go find one that we can, I guess, some membership kind of thing to try to get into it, but it wouldn't be too hard, but there would be some way to get into it.
There's a lot of, kind of general purpose ones where they say anyone can go as long as you don't say hate speech. And then there's ones that say like you have to be a specific religion, or you have to get an invite from a member who's already on the system. So there's kind of different barriers to entry, but to say like sign up for Mastodon and get involved, anyone can do it, and it doesn't require, nerd tech skills or anything like that. And once you start using it, you'll realize there's benefits because you're not inundated with advertisements, and you're not inundated with commercial content that you don't actually want to see.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that was informative, and especially for somebody like me. I mean, I have several friends, including you, obviously, who are more tech savvy. I guess one of my friends set up a Minecraft server recently, so so I know people who do this stuff. But I think it's really good to kind of get a view of how this stuff works, and maybe throw in a little bit of the economics about why we're not seeing alternatives and all this stuff. So thanks for joining me, Levi B, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to the Trad Dads podcast. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really helps us out.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.